You don't have a discipline problem. You have a morning problem. Not because you wake up late. Not because you're lazy. But because the first 20 minutes of your day quietly decide who you are going to be for the next 16 hours. You wake up. The alarm goes off. You reach for your phone just to check the time. A notification catches your attention. Then another. 10 minutes disappear. You finally sit up, already behind. Your mind is scattered. You rush through getting ready. You promise yourself you'll regain control later. You won't. Because that first decision wasn't small. It was structural. Weak mornings don't shout. They negotiate. They whisper things like, "It's just today." You need a slow start. You'll focus once you get going. But by the time your day begins, your standard has already been lowered. And here's the uncomfortable truth: every weak morning is a quiet vote for a weaker identity. You think discipline is about willpower at 3 p.m. It isn't. It's about clarity at 6 a.m. It's about who is in control before the world starts making demands on you. If your mornings are inconsistent, reactive, or emotionally driven, your entire day becomes defensive. You're responding instead of leading. Catching up instead of creating momentum. This isn't about productivity hacks. It's about identity alignment. In this video, you're going to understand why weak mornings multiply stress, the hidden psychological pattern that sabotages your start, and the internal shift that turns mornings into leverage instead of liability. By the end, you won't need motivation to have better mornings. You'll see why allowing weak ones is a form of self-negotiation you can no longer afford. If you want to destroy weak mornings, you need to see the structure behind them. Most people treat bad mornings as accidents. They're not. They're patterns. There are 4 internal mechanisms at work. You wake up and ask a feeling how the day should begin. If you don't feel ready, you slow down. If you feel tired, you indulge it. This is a subtle form of emotional authority. Your mood becomes the decision maker. This is a delayed gratification failure in disguise. You trade 10 minutes of comfort for hours of reduced clarity. You hit snooze. You scroll. You linger. Each delay lowers activation energy for the next delay. Momentum moves backward before the day even starts. At night, you have standards. You plan. You commit. But in the morning, you forget who you said you were. This is a common self-licensing bias. Yesterday was productive, so I can ease up. Or, I worked hard all week, so this morning doesn't matter. Small relaxations accumulate. You begin your day with choices instead of structure. Should I work out? Should I check messages? Should I plan first? Too many micro decisions drain clarity before meaningful work begins. Here's the important point: none of these feel destructive in isolation. A slow start feels harmless. A scroll feels temporary. A skipped routine feels flexible. But compounded over 30 days, weak mornings create weak positioning. You start days in reaction mode. And when you begin behind, you stay behind. This isn't about waking up at 5 a.m. It's about eliminating negotiation. Strong mornings remove options. Weak mornings create them. The shift you need isn't energy. It's structural control. In the next section, we'll break down how each of these mechanisms silently erodes your identity and how to replace them with a framework that makes strength automatic instead of emotional. The first mechanism is emotional authority. When you wake up and immediately check how you feel before deciding what to do, you've already shifted control. Mood becomes policy. You say you'll train this morning, but you don't feel it. You say you'll start deep work early, but you need a softer start. You say you'll review finances, but you aren't mentally fresh yet. Notice what's happening. Your long-term self makes commitments. Your short-term self evaluates comfort. And comfort usually wins. This pattern is subtle. It doesn't feel like weakness. It feels reasonable. But reason filtered through emotion is unstable. Imagine a workplace scenario. You plan to spend the first hour on your highest value task. Instead, you open email just to clear it. That small shift changes your entire posture. You move from proactive creation to reactive response. Now your day belongs to other people's priorities. The identity implication is direct. You become someone who waits to feel ready. But discipline is not the removal of discomfort. It is the refusal to consult it. Rohn said, discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. That bridge is built in the first decisions of the day. When you remove emotion as a gatekeeper, mornings become cleaner. You act because it is scheduled, not because it is pleasant. The second mechanism is delay momentum. Every time you hit snooze or scroll in bed, you create backward movement. You're not resting. You're reinforcing hesitation. Think about physical health. If you delay your workout by 30 minutes, the odds of skipping it increase dramatically. Not because of time, but because of friction. The longer you wait, the more mental resistance grows. A grounded example, I once knew a colleague who struggled with consistency. He wasn't lazy. He worked hard during the day. But every morning he negotiated with the alarm. 5 more minutes became 20. That delay forced him to rush breakfast, skip planning, and start work scattered. By noon, he fell behind. By evening, he felt discouraged. His issue wasn't work ethic. It was morning hesitation compounding into daily stress. Delay builds psychological drag. Strong mornings eliminate drag by eliminating pause. Wait. Stand. Move. No evaluation. No commentary. When you shorten the gap between waking and action, you reduce friction across the entire day. Identity-wise, this creates someone who moves when it's time, not when it's convenient. The third mechanism is structural emptiness. Many weak mornings fail not because of emotion, but because of ambiguity. If your morning is undefined, your impulses will fill it. You wake up without a clear sequence. So you improvise. Improvisation invites distraction. Consider financial discipline. If you plan to review spending sometime this week, it rarely happens. But if you schedule 15 minutes every morning to check accounts and track numbers, it becomes automatic. The difference is structure. Mornings require pre-commitment. Clothes laid out, workout decided, first task written, phone outside reach. When structure exists, willpower becomes irrelevant. Without structure, you are forced to decide in a vulnerable state. And vulnerability combined with options leads to softness. The identity implication here is powerful. Structure signals self-respect. It says, my future matters enough to remove guesswork. Weak mornings are usually unplanned mornings. The fourth mechanism is identity fragmentation. At night, you think clearly. You imagine progress. You define standards. But in the morning, you operate as if that version of you never existed. This split weakens internal trust. If you repeatedly ignore the person who planned your growth, you start doubting your own commitments. That doubt spreads. You hesitate more. You commit less confidently. You lower standards quietly. Strong mornings repair identity continuity. When you execute what last night's version of you decided, you reinforce alignment. You prove to yourself that your word holds weight. That proof compounds. Let's look at social boundaries as another example. Suppose you've decided to protect your time, no unnecessary morning calls, no immediate message replies. But if the first thing you do after waking is check notifications and respond instantly, you've already surrendered your boundary. You've trained others to expect access. And you've trained yourself to allow intrusion. Destroying weak mornings requires reclaiming the first hour as protected territory. No one enters until you've aligned. Now here's the deeper truth. Weak mornings don't just reduce productivity. They lower your internal standard. Each small compromise becomes evidence. Evidence builds identity. If every morning begins with delay, distraction, and emotional negotiation, the evidence says, I am inconsistent. But if every morning begins with execution, however small, the evidence says, I follow through. The actions themselves don't need to be dramatic. 10 push-ups, 10 minutes of reading, 5 minutes reviewing goals, immediate bed making. What matters is sequence and certainty. Wake. Execute. Begin. Not wake. Evaluate. Debate. Your morning sets the narrative for the day. If you start reactive, you remain reactive. If you start decisive, your posture shifts. Destroying weak mornings is not about becoming extreme. It's about removing softness at the exact moment softness tries to enter. You don't need a perfect routine. You need a non-negotiable one. And when that first hour becomes clean, controlled, and intentional, something changes internally. You stop hoping for good days. You start constructing them. Destroying weak mornings is not about becoming intense. It's about becoming aligned. Most people approach discipline as effort. They think strength means pushing harder, waking earlier, adding more tasks. But effort without identity reinforcement collapses under pressure. The real shift is this: mornings are not about productivity. They are about self-definition. Every morning you cast a vote. Not for success. Not for wealth. Not even for health. You vote for the type of person you are willing to be. If your first action of the day is intentional, you reinforce authorship. If your first action is reactive, you reinforce dependency. This is where compounding enters the conversation. A single weak morning doesn't ruin anything. But 200 of them build a personality that hesitates. A single decisive morning doesn't transform your life. But 200 of them construct internal authority. Compounding works regardless of your awareness. The question is, what is compounding? Confidence compounds, delay compounds, clarity compounds, excuses compound. The first hour is leverage because it multiplies whatever standard you choose. There is also a connection here to responsibility and self-respect. Self-respect is not a feeling. It is the memory of kept promises. When you wake up and execute what you said you would, you store evidence. That evidence becomes trust. And trust becomes calm strength. Notice the tone difference between someone who controls their mornings and someone who doesn't. One moves with quiet steadiness. The other constantly resets, apologizes to themselves, and restarts. Weak mornings create internal noise. Strong mornings create internal silence. When you no longer argue with yourself at 6 a.m., the rest of the day becomes lighter. Not easier, but cleaner. And this clarity doesn't require dramatic routines. It requires boundaries. Your phone does not dictate the first action. Your mood does not dictate the first action. Your fatigue does not dictate the first action. Structure does. Once that principle is installed, mornings stop being a daily battle. They become a system. And systems reduce friction. When friction is reduced, consistency rises. When consistency rises, identity stabilizes. When identity stabilizes, outcomes follow without emotional drama. Destroying weak mornings is less about waking up earlier and more about waking up decisive. The person you become over the next 5 years will largely reflect how you begin your days. Not because mornings are magical, but because repetition is. You don't fix your life at night when you feel reflective. You fix it in the morning when you feel resistance. That's the difference. Weak mornings are not accidents. They are permissions. Small approvals that say, lower the standard today. And once a standard is lowered at the start, it rarely rises later. But when you remove negotiation from the first hour, something stabilizes. You stop arguing with yourself, you stop restarting every Monday, you stop needing motivational spikes to compensate for structural weakness. Instead, you wake up and execute. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. Simply because that's who you are. The world will always apply pressure, work demands, financial responsibilities, unexpected problems, social expectations. You can't control when those arrive. But you can control whether you meet them from a position of clarity or from a position of apology. Strong mornings don't guarantee perfect days. They guarantee alignment. And alignment, repeated long enough, becomes identity. When your mornings are clean, your decisions sharpen. When your decisions sharpen, your standards rise. When your standards rise, your life adjusts accordingly. So destroy the weakness at the only moment it consistently appears. Right after you wake up. Because the person who controls the first hour eventually controls much more than that.